rich millionaire, disowned, pregnant wife, and unborn baby. Years later, that baby became his boss. Have you ever wondered what happens when a man's greatest achievement turns into his worst regret? Today, we bring you the riveting story of Ethan Cole, a millionaire who callously disowned his pregnant wife, Isabella, and abandoned their unborn baby in pursuit of wealth, prestige, and power. Little did he know that fate was weaving a tale of astounding irony. Years later, the child he once rejected would grow up to become the one person capable of toppling his empire. Get ready for a roller coaster ride of twists, heartbreak, triumph, and ultimately hard-hitting karma. This is the story of the child who rose to be the boss of the father who once disowned him. In the bustling heart of New York City, success stories unfold on busy sidewalks and lofty boardrooms every single day. But few were more spectacular than that of Ethan Cole. With piercing green eyes and an air of self-assured charisma, Ethan was the kind of man you wouldn't forget easily. He was born into a modest household in upstate New York, the youngest son of a schoolteacher and a mechanic. From an early age, Ethan possessed an uncanny ambition to break free from the small-town life that threatened to tether his dreams. Ethan's intelligence became evident during his teenage years. He excelled in math and economics, earning a scholarship to a prestigious university. After graduating top of his class in finance, he leveraged his academic brilliance to land a junior position at a formidable investment firm on Wall Street. There, he was taken under the wing of a ruthless mentor who taught him that success on Wall Street wasn't just about being good at numbers, it was about understanding the power of perception. Ambition, appearances, and an insatiable hunger for status were the cornerstones of climbing the capitalist ladder. Ethan quickly learned how to navigate complex deals and make profitable moves that caught the attention of higher-ups. By his late 20s, Ethan had already made his first million, no small feat for someone who'd started out with nothing. Using his financial acumen, he branched out into high-risk, high-reward ventures, capitalizing on the tech boom of the early 2000s. He had a golden touch when it came to selecting startups to invest in. Stories spread around the industry about Ethan's ability to transform small seeds into towering redwoods of profit. Soon enough, his name appeared in business journals and on the lips of envious colleagues. The man had arrived. Behind the closed doors of the city's most exclusive parties, Ethan glided through throngs of admirers. He sipped expensive champagne, wore tailored suits, and drove a sleek Mercedes-Benz that turned heads on Fifth Avenue. Even though he prided himself on his financial achievements, Ethan carefully cultivated an image of humility when it suited him. In boardrooms, he was known for his razor-sharp mind and unyielding negotiation style. But in elite social circles, he portrayed a debonair gentleman, philanthropic and cultured. An interview in Forbes magazine lauded him as a new breed of magnate who blends intellect, charm, and innovation with unstoppable drive. Those who truly knew Ethan, however, realized that behind the polished exterior lurked a fierce determination that could overshadow any of his softer qualities. He was the kind of man who believed that attachments would only weigh him down, and nothing was more important than his own ambition. Relationships were fine, as long as they didn't interfere with his pursuit of success. Marriage, children, a happy home life, these were aspects he deemed secondary to becoming the best in the financial world. So, when Ethan met Isabella at an exclusive charity gala, no one was more surprised than he was at the instant connection he felt. Isabella Garcia was a bright, compassionate woman whose warmth radiated even in a room filled with the city's wealthy elite. She was there representing a humanitarian organization that focused on supporting impoverished communities in South America. At first sight, Ethan was captivated by her. He was drawn not just by her external beauty, but by the empathy in her eyes, something rarely seen in the transactional corridors of his day-to-day life. After all, his world was about numbers, returns on investment, and ruthless calculations. Isabella, on the other hand, spoke fervently about social responsibility, the power of education, and how corporations could do more than just hoard profits. Their first conversation lasted hours. She challenged his worldview in the gentlest way possible, pointing out that wealth alone wasn't enough to truly make a difference unless it was harnessed for some greater good. Ethan found himself enthralled. Though he'd told himself he had no time for relationships, he found his carefully constructed walls breaking down. Within a few weeks, they started dating, dining at upscale restaurants, but also volunteering together at community centers. Isabella adored seeing him outside his tailored suits and fancy offices. She often teased him about how flustered he got around the children they tutored. Her presence calmed him, offering a contrast to his cutthroat professional life. To the surprise of both their families, Ethan proposed after just 6 months of courtship. His parents were thrilled that he had found someone loving and kind. Isabella's family, though cautious, soon saw that this ambitious financier seemed to truly care for their daughter. Everything moved fast. Wedding bells rang in a small but elegant ceremony in the Hamptons, a location that spoke to Ethan's wealth, yet remained relatively low-key at Isabella's request. She insisted that their wedding budget also include a donation to her favorite charity, an idea that Ethan finally agreed to after some initial hesitation. On their wedding day, he told her with tears in his eyes that she had changed him. She'd made him see that there was more to life than money. In that moment, Ethan believed he meant every word. The newlyweds started their life together in Ethan's penthouse, immersing themselves in each other's worlds. Isabella attended philanthropic events and continued her work with her humanitarian organization, while Ethan expanded his empire, forging deeper connections with the city's elite. From the outside looking in, they appeared to be the perfect couple, successful, good-hearted, and deeply in love. Yet underneath the surface, there were undercurrents of tension. Isabella's convictions that life was about more than just profit sometimes clashed with Ethan's unstoppable thirst for success. He would listen politely when she talked about supporting a new cause, but rarely gave more than the minimum effort. Over time, her attempts to involve him in charitable initiatives felt like pushing a boulder uphill. While he put on a supportive face in public, he often dismissed her ideas at home, giving them little thought as he busied himself with business calls that sometimes stretched into the night. Despite these subtle fractures, Isabella believed that love was about patience and perseverance. She was certain that, given time, Ethan would come around to the bigger purpose she so strongly believed in. Little did she know, however, that a force was about to test their marriage in a way she never saw coming, and that force was new life, quietly forming within her. It was a bright spring morning when Isabella discovered she was pregnant. She had awakened feeling unusually exhausted, attributing it to late-night charity planning, but an odd sensation in her body and a wave of intuition prompted her to take a pregnancy test. The small plus sign on the plastic stick filled her heart with both exhilaration and apprehension. Was Ethan ready for fatherhood? Would he see this new development as an interruption of his meticulously planned life, or embrace it as a new blessing? She decided to share the news over dinner that evening. Candlelight flickered across their elegantly set table as she, brimming with anticipation, broke the news. At first, Ethan fell silent, his face an impenetrable mask. 1,000 thoughts seemed to run through his mind. Isabella could see the tension in his posture, the way his jaw tightened, and her hopeful smile began to falter. This was not the joyful reaction she had dreamed of. She'd expected shock, maybe even tears of excitement. Instead, Ethan rose from his chair, paced the dining room floor, and finally asked in a trembling voice, "Are you sure you're pregnant?" She nodded, fighting back tears. That single question felt like a rejection. She tried to reassure him that they could make this work, that they had the means, the resources, and the love to raise a child together. But he didn't seem convinced. "This is not part of the plan," Ethan muttered. He sank into a nearby chair, burying his head in his hands. Over the next few minutes, he rattled off a list of concerns. They were too busy. His business was on the cusp of a major expansion. How would a pregnancy fit into the intense schedule he'd set for himself? Could Isabella still attend all her philanthropic events? Would having a child derail his carefully plotted trajectory toward becoming one of the city's most influential financiers? A mix of anger and heartbreak rose in Isabella. She had always known Ethan was driven, but she believed deep down he had enough warmth to embrace their baby. His reaction revealed just how skewed his priorities were. As the conversation progressed, it turned into a harrowing argument. He accused her of being careless, suggesting they should have been more cautious if she wasn't on board with his timeline. She retorted that love, marriage, and family shouldn't revolve around a so-called timeline. Couldn't they find space in their hearts for a child? Ethan's final words that night felt like a cold slap. "We can't do this right now. We need to consider other options." Isabella's stomach lurched. She knew exactly what he meant. He was implying that she terminate the pregnancy. The very thought horrified her. She had always wanted a family, and despite her hope that Ethan might not be fully ready, she trusted that love would guide them. She refused outright. Her determined stance ignited Ethan's fury. No one had told him no in a long time, and the fact that his own wife was doing so in a matter he deemed critical made him feel cornered. The more she stood her ground, the more he dug in his heels. By the end of the night, he was hurling accusations, blaming her for being selfish, for not understanding the magnitude of the responsibilities he carried. She, in turn, accused him of being heartless, of only caring about his name and reputation. Days turned into weeks of constant tension. The once loving couple now barely spoke without fighting, their penthouse filled with silence that weighed heavier than any argument. And then came the final blow. One night, Ethan returned late from a business meeting, reeking of frustration and whiskey. He stated bluntly that if she insisted on having this child, then she would have to do it without him. "I can't be a father right now, Isabella, and I won't pretend to be one," he declared, his eyes cold. "So, what are you saying?" she asked, voice trembling with desperation. "I'm saying that if you keep this baby," Ethan said, "I'm done." Those words echoed through her as she stood in stunned silence. He walked out of the penthouse, slamming the door behind him. Isabella was left alone, clutching her belly and weeping in the darkness. Ethan's departure was not a momentary flash of anger. Over the next few days, everything fell apart. He moved out of their shared home and had his legal team send Isabella official documents, offering her a sizable sum of money if she would just sign divorce papers and keep her pregnancy out of the public eye. The hush money sickened her. She felt betrayed, as if everything they'd shared had been a lie. Isabella's parents were outraged. They pleaded with Ethan's family, hoping someone might talk sense into him, but he had carefully isolated himself, refusing any calls or attempts at reconciliation. He ignored texts from her, and when she managed to confront him at his office, he threatened to file a restraining order if she continued to harass him about this child. Heartbroken and disillusioned, Isabella found herself at a crossroads. She had to make a decision: keep fighting to salvage the marriage of a man who had abandoned her, or walk away with her dignity intact. For Isabella, the choice was clear. She resolved to raise her child alone, leaning on her faith and the love of her family for strength. Returning Ethan's hush money, she also refused alimony or any financial support. If he wanted to be out of the picture, she would grant him exactly that, but she would never let him force her to give up her child. Friends advised her to go after a massive divorce settlement, considering Ethan's wealth, but she wanted no part of his money. Accepting it felt like accepting the terms of a deal that negated the existence of her baby. Her attorney begged her to reconsider for the baby's sake after all. Child support was a right. She refused, stating she would not let Ethan have any claim over their baby's life if it meant subjecting her child to the possibility of a father who resented them. And so the divorce was finalized quickly, with Isabella walking away from her short-lived marriage with nothing but the clothes on her back and a mother's love for the little life inside her. She found a small studio apartment in Queens, far from the glitz of Manhattan. At first, it was a jarring shift from the luxury penthouse, but the space gave her peace. She reconnected with her job at the humanitarian organization, though cut her hours down to manage her pregnancy and finances. News of the scandal quietly rippled through certain social circles. Ethan's PR team spun the story that the split was amicable, that the couple grew apart, and that he generously provided for his ex-wife's future. For the most part, the tabloids didn't delve too deep. There were far more sensational stories to cover in the city that never slept. Isabella's friends commended her for staying above the gossip. Meanwhile, Ethan made sure to bury any rumors that might harm his business reputation, painting himself as a victim of unfortunate circumstances. In her modest new world, Isabella learned the meaning of survival. She budgeted carefully and picked up side gigs writing grant proposals for smaller charities. At night, she whispered lullabies to her growing belly, feeling the baby respond with gentle kicks. Despite the heartbreak, she felt a profound sense of love and purpose. She promised her unborn child that she would create a nurturing environment, filled with warmth and honesty, even if it lacked the opulence that Ethan's fortune could have provided. Isabella's pregnancy, though fraught with emotional turmoil, progressed without significant medical complications. She took every prenatal vitamin and kept every appointment, determined to do her best despite her limited finances. Her parents visited often, bringing groceries and moral support. Nights were sometimes lonely, but the anticipation of holding her baby fueled her resolve. On a rainy autumn morning, Isabella gave birth to a healthy baby boy named Oliver. The moment she cradled him in her arms, the rest of the world seemed to disappear. The infant's tiny cries symbolized a new beginning. He was innocence personified, carrying no blame for the chaos that preceded him. She felt an overwhelming rush of protection and love, and her tears fell freely. Raising Oliver alone was not easy. Medical bills piled up, so Isabella returned to full-time work sooner than she would have liked. She managed childcare with the help of her mother and a few trusted friends. Each day brought new challenges: sleep deprivation, juggling work deadlines, making sure there was enough money to cover the essentials. Yet every late-night feeding was a reminder that she was fighting for something beautiful, a chance to give her child the life he deserved, far away from the toxicity that Ethan had shown. Months rolled into years. Oliver grew into a curious toddler, then a bright, sensitive child. He had his mother's earnest brown eyes and, ironically, his father's sharp intellect. Isabella was honest with him from a young age. He knew that Daddy wasn't around, though she avoided demonizing Ethan. Instead, she said his father had chosen a different path. She chose not to burden her son with bitterness or condemnation, believing that love and truth, even when painful, would yield a stronger, kinder person than resentment ever could. Oliver was inquisitive about the world, always asking questions far beyond his years. He devoured books and found great joy in learning. At school, he excelled academically but stood out more for his compassion. Whenever another student struggled, Oliver would be the first to volunteer to help. His teachers marveled at his empathy and leadership qualities. Though they lived in a modest apartment, there was a richness in their lives that no amount of money could rival the richness of a home filled with unconditional love. Meanwhile, Ethan's empire continued to grow. He founded an investment firm, diversified into real estate, and made strategic acquisitions of promising tech startups. By his mid-30s, Ethan was featured on the cover of Forbes as one of the country's most influential entrepreneurs. He built an image of philanthropic involvement, ironically channeling funds into causes that would bolster his public persona. Yet behind the philanthropic facade, he remained as profit-driven as ever. Any mention of Isabella or the child he'd abandoned was strictly off-limits. Ethan surrounded himself with sycophants and employees who dared not breach that topic. He dated models and socialites, though none of these relationships lasted long. Some speculated he was incapable of true intimacy, while he privately believed love was an inconvenience that distracted him from his career. Oliver's academic prowess and thirst for knowledge became more evident as he reached high school. He secured scholarships to prestigious private institutions thanks to his exceptional grades and philanthropic activities, organizing charity drives, volunteering at community centers, and tutoring peers in math and science. Isabella, too, moved upward in her career at the humanitarian organization, eventually becoming a senior project manager. Their household was by no means lavish, but it was comfortable, brimming with genuine gratitude for life's blessings. Around the time Oliver was 16, an opportunity arose for him to participate in a specialized summer program at Harvard University, a youth entrepreneurship workshop. He excelled in group projects, leading one team to develop a prototype for an app that connected local charities with potential donors. By the end of the program, Oliver's mentors were raving about his potential, praising both his leadership and his emotional intelligence. When Oliver returned home, he was animated with plans for the future, maybe start a non-profit or head a tech venture that combined profitability with social responsibility. Isabella watched her son's excitement with teary pride. She recognized so much of her own compassion in him, blended with a spark of ambition that was reminiscent of Ethan. Yet Oliver's ambition was tempered by a moral compass that refused to sacrifice kindness for gain. College acceptance letters rolled in during his senior year: Stanford, MIT, Harvard, Yale. Ultimately, Oliver chose Harvard for its dual focus on entrepreneurship and social impact initiatives. Isabella was stunned when he insisted on taking minimal student loans, leveraging scholarships, grants, and work-study programs. He wanted to lighten her financial burden as much as possible. Their tearful hug on the day he left for college was bittersweet. She was letting him go, but into a world that he was ready to conquer on his terms. At Harvard, Oliver flourished. He became president of the Social Entrepreneurship Club and founded a consulting group that helped local NGOs streamline their operations. One of his professors, an esteemed economist, noticed Oliver's knack for bridging philanthropy and practical business models. Under this professor's mentorship, Oliver wrote a thesis examining how corporations could adopt ethical business practices without sacrificing profitability. It turned heads among academic and corporate circles, landing him a few references in business publications. By the time Oliver graduated, he had job offers from top consulting firms and tech companies. Yet he chose a unique path. He wanted to launch his own startup focused on sustainable development in underprivileged communities, bridging the gap between Silicon Valley innovation and humanitarian ideals. Partners flocked to him, drawn by his compelling vision of doing well by doing good. Isabella's chest nearly burst with pride when she saw the headlines praising her son, who was just starting to make waves in the business world, and for all the right reasons. While Oliver's star was rising, Ethan's empire was showing cracks, subtle at first, then more glaring. A series of high-risk, high-yield deals started going sour. Unethical practices that he'd papered over for years were coming to light, prompting scrutiny from financial regulators. A few of his closest associates, once fiercely loyal, distanced themselves. Rumors circulated that Ethan's once untouchable empire was teetering on the edge. Behind the scenes, Ethan was desperate to salvage his reputation and finances. A major investment in a new tech venture flopped, costing him tens of millions of dollars. Legal fees stacked up. He had expanded too rapidly, spread himself too thin, and neglected due diligence in his quest to remain on top. By the time he realized the severity of the situation, his personal brand had also taken a hit. Lavish fundraisers that once welcomed him began to exclude him from guest lists, not wanting association with rumored legal and ethical entanglements. Sponsors pulled out, boards asked him to step down, and partners quietly ended collaborations. As if fate were orchestrating a twist of epic proportions, Ethan's last-ditch efforts to secure financing led him toward a cutting-edge, sustainable development startup, one known for bridging Silicon Valley ingenuity with philanthropic endeavors in impoverished regions. The company's name was NextGen Pact, and it had gained rapid traction for its ethical investment strategies and transparent approach to global development projects. It was exactly the kind of stable, values-driven enterprise that could salvage his dwindling credibility if only they would agree to let him in. Little did Ethan know that the founder and CEO of NextGen Pact was none other than Oliver Garcia, his biological son. Oliver had deliberately chosen to take his mother's surname in college, a step Isabella fully supported. None of the marketing materials or press releases about Oliver's background ever mentioned Ethan Cole. For all intents and purposes, Oliver's lineage was unknown to the industry, and Ethan was not the type to recall or track the child he'd once disowned. The name Oliver Garcia never triggered any memories, at least not until their fateful encounter. Desperate to shore up his finances, Ethan set up a meeting with NextGen Pact's top executives, hoping to negotiate a capital infusion that would bail him out. He arrived at NextGen Pact's corporate office, a modern, eco-friendly building with recycled materials and open workspaces. The reception area showcased photographs of successful humanitarian projects across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, along with quotes emphasizing social responsibility. A part of Ethan balked at the altruistic tone. Still, he needed a lifeline, and if NextGen Pact could offer it, he was more than willing to feign interest in their cause. He sat in a sleek waiting room, flipping through a brochure that detailed the company's mission, empowering communities through innovation, forging partnerships that uplift lives while generating sustainable financial returns. He scoffed quietly at the notion that morality and profit could coexist in big business. Nonetheless, he'd come this far. A young assistant appeared, greeting him cordially. She escorted him through a winding corridor lined with offices, eventually stopping at a double-glass door. "Mr. Cole, please wait here. Our CEO, Mr. Oliver Garcia, will see you shortly." Ethan, his nerves fraying from weeks of professional free fall, straightened his tie. The door opened, and in walked a tall, confident man in his late 20s. Oliver wore a simple button-down shirt and trousers, an unpretentious outfit that spoke volumes about his style of leadership, grounded, not flashy. Ethan immediately noticed Oliver's piercing gaze, which seemed to hold both kindness and uncanny resolve. "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming," Oliver said politely, extending his hand. Ethan shook it, noticing a twinge of familiarity in the younger man's face, but unable to place it. "Thank you for meeting with me," he replied. "I know how busy your schedule must be." They exchanged formalities, discussing mutual acquaintances in the tech and investment circles. Oliver politely steered the conversation to the reason behind the meeting. Ethan laid out a carefully crafted pitch. He sought collaboration, synergy, a partnership that would benefit both parties. His flattery was thick, praising Next Gen Pac's moral compass and success. Oliver remained composed, occasionally nodding, but never fully committing to any sentiment. After nearly an hour of talking, Ethan sensed Oliver's caution. Finally, Oliver excused himself. "Mr. Cole, if you wouldn't mind waiting, I need to consult with some of my senior advisors. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes." Ethan agreed and was guided back to the waiting room. He tapped his foot anxiously, feeling that something about Oliver had him on edge. Was it the quiet confidence, or the sense that Oliver could see right through his motives? When the young assistant finally summoned Ethan again, this time she led him into a larger conference room where a few senior staff members sat, including a poised older woman who introduced herself as the CFO. Oliver sat at the head of the table. "We've heard your proposal, Mr. Cole," Oliver began, "and we have some concerns." Ethan tried his best to address their qualms, but the CFO pressed him on the rumors of financial improprieties within his firm. Another executive questioned whether aligning with him might tarnish Next Gen Pac's reputation. The line of questioning was relentless, thorough, and all the while, Oliver watched intently. Despite his bravado, Ethan felt beads of sweat forming on his brow. Toward the end of the meeting, Oliver stood up, glancing at a document that laid out Ethan's business track record. As he scanned the lines of text, a single detail slammed into him: Ethan Cole's date of birth, background, and a mention in an old press release about a marriage to someone named Isabella Garcia. Oliver's breath caught in his throat. He quickly composed himself, not wanting to startle anyone else in the room. A flood of conflicting emotions shot through Oliver. He had grown up hearing about a father who had wanted nothing to do with him, a father who disowned his mother the moment she refused to end her pregnancy. He'd never pursued Ethan or tried to track him down. His mother's unconditional love had been enough. But here, in the flesh, was the man who had triggered so much suffering in Isabella's life. And ironically, that same man was now at his mercy, unaware of the familial bond they shared. Oliver's hands trembled under the table, but he maintained a calm exterior. "We will continue our internal review, Mr. Cole. I suggest we meet again next week." Ethan nodded, shaking hands around the table. He noticed Oliver's sudden aloofness, but chalked it up to typical corporate formality. When the meeting ended, Oliver retreated to his corner office, locked the door, and sank into his chair. The emotional weight he felt was immense. Knowing that Ethan Cole, a man who had never once reached out to see if his abandoned child was even alive, was sitting across the table from him, seeking his help, was staggering. Part of Oliver felt a surge of anger, recalling nights his mother cried quietly, thinking Oliver was asleep. Another part of him felt pity for this man who seemed lost, chasing illusions of success with no one left to truly care for him. By the time Oliver collected himself, he made a decision. He wouldn't reveal anything yet. He wanted to see how Ethan acted in subsequent meetings, to determine whether he had changed or if he was still the manipulative man Isabella had described. Oliver suspected it was the latter, but he believed people could evolve, given enough humility and time. Over the next few weeks, Oliver met with Ethan multiple times. Ethan attempted to charm everyone, touting the synergy between his financial expertise and Next Gen Pac's philanthropic vision. But behind closed doors, staff at Next Gen Pact voiced skepticism. Some had done deeper research, unearthing questionable deals and pending lawsuits against Ethan's firm. Their consensus leaned toward rejection. Still, Oliver wanted to observe Ethan's character further. One day, during a final negotiation session, Ethan's frustration peaked. He'd been given the runaround for weeks, and he started to suspect that Next Gen Pact might not offer the partnership he so desperately needed. He confronted Oliver privately after the others left the conference room. "Look," Ethan said, desperation creeping into his tone, "I've been nothing but transparent. But you keep delaying. If you're not interested, just say so. I have other options." Oliver regarded him calmly. "You have other options?" "Of course I do," Ethan snapped, though the emptiness in his eyes betrayed the false bravado. "I've built an empire on strategic deals. I don't need you." Oliver leaned forward. "So why come here? Why not go to your other options instead of wasting time with us?" Ethan hesitated, anger flooding his face. "You don't know who you're talking to. I was on the cover of Forbes. I've brokered deals that made millions. I could buy and sell any startup in Silicon Valley if I wanted to." Oliver's gaze was steady, a hint of sorrow flickering in his eyes. "I know exactly who you are," he said in a measured voice. "Maybe you don't remember me, but I remember you, Ethan Cole." The tension in the air was palpable. For a long moment, Ethan just stared, perplexed. Then Oliver took a deep breath and spoke words that he had both longed and dreaded to say for years. "I'm your son. The one you disowned before I was even born." A stunned silence filled the conference room. Ethan's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing as if he couldn't form words. Finally, he managed to stammer, I don't understand. You're Oliver Garcia." Oliver nodded. "Isabella Garcia is my mother." Ethan's knees nearly buckled. He had never expected this confrontation, much less under these circumstances. Panic and shame coursed through him. His mind reeled with memories, signing divorce papers, sending hush money, walking away without a backward glance. You can't be," he gasped, searching for any denial. But Oliver's resemblance to Isabella was undeniable, and the timeline fit perfectly. I had no idea." Oliver let out a bitter laugh. "I'm sure you didn't. You made it clear you wanted nothing to do with me. She wanted no money from you, so it's no surprise. You never gave me a second thought." Ethan stumbled forward, grasping the back of a chair to steady himself. The weight of this revelation crashed down on him. His son, the child he had abandoned, was now in a position to dictate his financial future. "Oliver," he whispered, his voice cracking, I was young. I was an idiot. Oliver cut him off. "You were selfish and cruel," he said, his tone laced with hurt. "My mother worked multiple jobs just to keep a roof over our heads. She cried herself to sleep, wondering why you despised the mere idea of me. She made sure I never grew up hating you, but do you have any idea how much pain you caused?" Ethan looked stricken. I'm sorry," he managed. "I was consumed by my ambition. I thought a child would derail everything I'd built." Oliver's voice trembled. "Well, here I am, the child you tried to erase. And guess what? I built my own path, with none of your money or your name." Emotion overcame Ethan. For the first time in his life, tears welled in his eyes. He reached out as if to place a hand on Oliver's shoulder, but Oliver stepped back. "Please," Ethan pleaded, "give me a chance to make this right. I didn't know how to handle it back then. I have regrets. I want to know you." Oliver studied him, recalling the stories his mother told, how Ethan had threatened to file a restraining order, how he had tried to pay her off to hide his existence. "You want a chance to make this right?" Oliver said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What does that mean?" Ethan fumbled for words. We could start fresh. You're my son. I'm sorry." "I know it might mean nothing now, but I've changed." Oliver held his gaze. "Have you? Because from where I'm standing, you're only here because you need my company's help. If you hadn't needed that partnership, would you have even bothered?" to look me up. Ethan had no answer. Silence stretched between them like a vast chasm. Finally, Oliver's shoulders sagged. "I'll talk to my team about the partnership," he said coolly. "But whatever their decision, don't confuse it with acceptance or forgiveness. That's something you earn, not buy." After the confrontation, Oliver revealed the truth to his CFO and closest advisors, expecting them to cut all ties with Ethan on the grounds of personal conflict. They were shocked by the revelation but left the final decision to Oliver. Publicly, they could spin it in any number of ways or quietly walk away. Morally, they questioned if partnering with a man who had such unethical baggage was wise, especially given what he'd done to Oliver's family. Oliver found himself torn. Part of him yearned for closure, for a chance to see if Ethan could truly change. Another part wanted to slam the door on him forever. Isabella was the only person Oliver trusted enough to confide in fully. On a visit to her apartment now, a cozy two-bedroom in a nicer neighborhood, he explained everything. Isabella listened calmly, tears shining in her eyes. She admitted that she'd never hated Ethan. She'd only felt heartbreak and disappointment. Over the years, she'd healed enough to let go of her bitterness. Now, faced with the possibility that father and son might reconcile, she told Oliver that, if his heart guided him to open that door, she'd support him. But she also urged him to be cautious. In the following days, Oliver wrestled with his decision. Ultimately, he chose not to punish Ethan through business matters. He believed in the mission of Next Gen Pact, which was to uplift communities and, in a broader sense, to show that ethical business could flourish. Denying Ethan's proposal purely out of personal vindication might conflict with the philanthropic spirit Oliver espoused. So, he made an offer of conditional partnership to Ethan, one that involved strict oversight, transparent accounting, and a set of ethical guidelines that Ethan's firm had to adhere to in order to even secure a fraction of Next Gen Pact's backing. When Oliver laid out the proposal, Ethan was stunned by its rigidity. However, he knew he was in no position to negotiate. If this partnership fell through, he might lose everything. So he swallowed his pride and signed the terms. He also agreed to an oversight committee within Next Gen Pact that would monitor his firm's business practices, a move that signaled a big shift if genuine. Over the next few months, Ethan's world upended in more ways than one. He found himself under the scrutiny of Oliver and his team, forced to adopt compliance measures he had previously scorned. But most significant was the emotional upheaval of acknowledging that Oliver was indeed his son. Each time they interacted professionally, Ethan yearned for a personal connection, but Oliver remained guarded. Yet as the partnership progressed, Ethan saw glimpses of Oliver's character. He was a fearless leader, beloved by his employees, admired for his empathy and intellect traits. Ethan realized he had once admired in Isabella. Every gesture Oliver made for the betterment of the company or the communities they served was a reminder of the life Ethan could have been part of. It gnawed at him, fueling a deep regret that he'd let fear and ambition rob him of fatherhood. Half a year into their strained partnership, a new opportunity arose for Next Gen Pact to sponsor a large-scale development project in rural Colombia, aligning perfectly with one of Isabella's philanthropic focuses. Oliver and his team planned a site visit, and in a surprising twist, Ethan volunteered to join. The old Ethan would never have considered traveling to a remote location with limited amenities, especially without guaranteed profit. But now there was an earnestness in his eyes that Oliver couldn't ignore. Reluctantly, Oliver allowed him to come along. The trip was eye-opening for Ethan. Walking through impoverished villages, meeting families struggling against systemic barriers, and observing how the Next Gen Pact team worked hand in hand with locals to develop sustainable solutions, he felt something shift within him. He'd spent years in glass skyscrapers, consumed by spreadsheets and deal-making. Yet here, in the muddy roads and humble homes, he witnessed a tangible impact that no high-rise office could replicate. At a particularly emotional moment, they visited a family whose children had to walk miles each day for clean water. Next Genpac's project would install a simple filtration system, drastically improving their quality of life. The gratitude in the villagers' eyes moved Ethan to tears. Later that evening, as the team gathered in a makeshift camp, Ethan asked Oliver for a moment alone. They walked under a canopy of stars, the distant hum of crickets and the chatter of villagers their only soundtrack. Ethan turned to Oliver, his face drawn and humble. "I know I can't erase what I did," he began, voice trembling. "I know an apology is a small offering after so many years, but I need to say it. I'm sorry, Oliver. I'm sorry for walking away from you and your mother. I was blinded by my own ambitions and fears." Oliver's chest tightened. He had waited his whole life to hear these words. "I appreciate you saying that," he said. "But it's not just about words, Dad." That last word slipped out involuntarily, hanging in the air. Ethan seemed taken aback, eyes filling with tears. "I'll do whatever it takes to prove I've changed." Oliver swallowed hard. "There is a lot of hurt to work through. I'm not sure I can just wave a wand and forgive everything. But seeing you here, caring about these people, it gives me some hope." Ethan exhaled, relief and remorse warring on his face. "I know I'll never get those lost years back, but if you ever find it in your heart, I'd like to be in your life, and I'd like to apologize to your mother in person, if she'd allow it." They stood quietly for a moment, the night sky stretching above them. Oliver felt tears prick at his eyes. "Let's take it one step at a time," he said softly. "We can't undo the past, but maybe we can build something new." Despite the progress Ethan made on the personal front, Karma demanded a pound of flesh for his past misdeeds. Investigations into his older deals came to fruition, unveiling a spectrum of financial irregularities from years ago. Regulators seized assets from Ethan's firm, froze several bank accounts, and threatened legal action against key players, including Ethan himself. The media pounced on the scandal, fueling headlines with stories of corporate greed and irresponsibility. Ethan's carefully curated image shattered almost overnight. Although he'd begun walking a path of redemption, the consequences of his earlier ruthlessness were inescapable. For months, he wrestled with the possibility of jail time, depending on the outcome of ongoing litigation. Oliver watched from the sidelines, torn. Part of him felt that Ethan was finally paying the price for the pain he had inflicted on others, not just him and his mother. Another part worried that, if Ethan truly was changing, what good would locking him away achieve? Yet the legal wheels turned inexorably. Ethan lost his luxury penthouse and liquidated whatever assets he could to settle lawsuits and pay mounting legal fees. He moved into a small rented condo, humbling himself further. In a painful irony, he found himself leaning on Oliver's guidance, an unimaginable scenario just a year earlier. Next Genpac's oversight committee severed official ties with Ethan's firm to distance themselves from the fallout. But Oliver ensured Ethan had a personal lifeline. He even offered to hire Ethan in a modest advisory role within Next Genpact, a job that came with a fraction of the salary Ethan was used to. It was a lifeline, but it was also an unspoken lesson. He would earn trust and survival by aligning himself with ethical principles. Initially, Ethan balked at the idea of working for his own son, especially at an entry-level wage. The once high-flying millionaire was now taking orders from a man half his age, who happened to be the very child he had cast aside. But faced with no better prospects and a newfound respect for Oliver, Ethan swallowed his pride and accepted. With the burden of the investigations still looming, Ethan at last gathered the courage to see Isabella. She'd agreed to meet him at a cafe near her office, but Oliver warned him to keep his expectations in check. Isabella had found peace after years of heartbreak. Any reconciliation would be on her terms. Ethan arrived early, fidgeting nervously with his coffee cup. When Isabella walked in, he saw the faint lines of age and the gentle grace she carried. She was as poised as ever. Time had etched wisdom on her face, but her eyes remained kind. As she approached, memories of their youthful romance flooded him. The gala where they first met, her laughter, her unwavering moral compass. "Isabella," he whispered, rising to greet her. She gave a polite nod, sitting across from him. Ethan, silence stretched for a moment, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. I'm sorry for everything." Her gaze was calm, unwavering. "I know. Oliver told me about your conversation in Colombia." He studied her face, his voice trembling. "I was a fool. You didn't deserve what I did." "Neither did Oliver. If I could go back," she shook her head gently. "We can't change the past. We can only learn from it." They spoke in hushed tones about the pain and chaos of years gone by. Ethan recounted how empty his life had felt, despite all the wealth. Isabella told him of nights she lay awake, wondering if she had made the right choices for Oliver. Ethan reached across the table, but didn't touch her hand without permission. "I'm deeply ashamed. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I hope one day you can look at me without hurt in your eyes." She exhaled softly. "I made peace a long time ago. The hurt is still there, yes, but it's more of a scar than an open wound." She paused. "Oliver is everything I could have asked for in a son. You should be proud of him, though you had no part in raising him." Tears escaped Ethan's eyes. "I am proud, so proud. Thank you for raising him to be the man he is." A wave of emotion passed between them. It was not romantic, nor was it purely antagonistic. It was the complex melding of two people who had once loved each other, parted disastrously, and were now uncertain how to stand in each other's presence. They left the cafe with a mutual understanding that while they couldn't rewrite the past, they could handle the present with honesty and dignity. Isabella offered a tentative invitation to dinner at her place, so he could spend time with Oliver in a more personal setting. It was not a promise of reconciliation, but a step toward healing. As months turned into a year, Ethan navigated his low-level advisory position under Oliver's leadership at Next Gen Pact. He went from making multi-million-dollar deals to meticulously compiling financial reports and assisting project leaders with budgets. The staff, initially wary of him, noticed a genuine change in his demeanor. He listened more than he spoke, apologized when he made mistakes, and earnestly tried to uphold the company's ethical standards. The press eventually moved on to new scandals, leaving Ethan's name less vilified in the headlines. The legal cases against him concluded with hefty fines and a suspended sentence, thanks in part to cooperation agreements he signed to uncover other unethical practices in his old circles. Despite this reprieve, Ethan's personal fortune was decimated. Yet, paradoxically, the loss of material wealth seemed to free him from the chains of his old identity. He spent his reduced salary sparingly, often sending part of it to philanthropic causes he once would have scoffed at. In time, Oliver noticed the sincerity of his father's transformation and began to open up. They shared lunches, with Ethan absorbing the complexities of Next Gen Pact's approach. He found a certain fulfillment in tackling smaller community-focused projects, witnessing firsthand how targeted funding and strategic planning could uplift real lives. One afternoon, Oliver called Ethan into his office. Ethan entered, wearing the standard company polo and jeans, worlds away from the custom suits of his past. Oliver looked up from his laptop, a hint of a smile on his lips. "Have a seat, Dad," he said, motioning to a chair. Ethan sat, slightly apprehensive. "Is something wrong?" Oliver shook his head. "On the contrary, we've been reviewing your performance. The team appreciates your insights. Several managers have said you're going above and beyond in bridging financial realism with social impact. Ethan felt a warmth spread through his chest. "I'm just doing my job," he said humbly. "I know it wasn't easy, adjusting to this role," Oliver continued, "but I see how much you've grown, how you respect our mission now. I want to offer you a more permanent position here at NextGen Pact, something that recognizes your abilities but also keeps our ethos at the forefront." Ethan swallowed hard, tears threatening to rise. He remembered a time when the thought of working under someone, especially his own son, would have seemed insulting. Now, it felt like the greatest honor. "Thank you, Oliver. I don't know what to say." Oliver stood up, walked around the desk, and extended his hand. "Welcome aboard, Dad. You've earned it." The moment felt surreal, an unspoken reflection of how drastically life had changed. Here was Ethan Cole, once a brash millionaire who discarded his pregnant wife, now humbly shaking hands with the son he had abandoned, the son who had become his boss. And yet, that moment held no bitterness or mockery. It was an odd sense of closure and new beginnings intertwining. Ethan's transformation began quietly, without any grand gestures, as he embraced his modest advisory position at NextGen Pact under Oliver's leadership. He went from chasing multi-million-dollar deals to helping design grassroots projects in rural communities. Although many on the team were initially skeptical of his motives, they soon noticed his genuine shift. Ethan listened more, apologized when wrong, and willingly followed the strict ethical guidelines he had once mocked. Isabella, still wary but far less bitter than before, allowed him brief visits to her home. Their exchanges were courteous, but never hinted at rekindling romance. She saw a changed man, someone humbled by the collapse of his empire and moved by the idealism that powered NextGen Pact. Slowly, Oliver and Ethan grew closer. They shared lunches and exchanged insights about responsible investing, forging a cautious but meaningful father-son bond. One highlight came when Oliver took the stage at a high-profile conference, announcing a groundbreaking partnership with international agencies. Ethan stood in the crowd, brimming with pride for the young man he had once abandoned. Later, backstage, they embraced in a moment that felt surreal. Ethan, stripped of his glory, celebrating the son who had eclipsed him in every dimension. Isabella joined them afterward for a simple dinner, where laughter and gentle memories replaced the bitterness of the past. Although a formal reunion was never declared, the three formed a fragile constellation of acceptance. Time smoothed out the sharp edges of regret. Ethan learned to measure success less by money and more by the tangible differences he could make in people's lives. Each day, he confronted the pain of lost years, but Oliver's forgiveness and Isabella's cautious understanding allowed a path forward. Though father and son did not always agree, their conflicts were free of malice. Ethan acknowledged he had much to learn from the very child he once deemed an impediment to his ambitions. Looking back on his old life, Ethan recognized how empty it truly was. In losing nearly everything he prized, his fortune, social standing, and illusion of invulnerability, he discovered a truer purpose. No amount of regret could bring back the years he had missed with Oliver, but each shared project, each frank conversation, and each tentative family meal helped fill a little more of the void. In the end, the man who cast aside his pregnant wife found hope and redemption by working alongside the son he had once disowned. If karma had demanded its price in public humiliation and the collapse of his empire, it had also offered Ethan a rare gift, the chance to rebuild his life on honesty, compassion, and acceptance. And in that delicate balance of loss and newfound love, father and son discovered the unbreakable ties that bound them, ready to move forward one day at a time. Thank you for watching this extraordinary tale of regret, redemption, and the resilience of a mother's love. From a millionaire's cold decision to abandon his pregnant wife, to the triumphant rise of the child he dismissed, this story reminds us that life's greatest riches often lie outside the confines of wealth and power. We witnessed how hard karma came for Ethan Cole, stripping him of his fortune and pride, only to grant him a rare second chance at family and purpose. In the end, the abandoned child soared higher than anyone ever expected, leading his father onto a path of genuine change and humility. If you found this story compelling, please show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing to this channel. Let's continue to spread powerful stories that inspire us to look deeper at life, love, and the consequences of our choices. Stay tuned for more.